Hello and welcome to B2B Revenue Leaders. I'm your host, Dustin. As always, this episode is brought to you by Testimonial Hero. Selling's hard right now. Your buyers trust you less, and that late stage peer evidence, like a reference call, just isn't enough anymore. So Testimonial Hero creates strategic video testimonials to use throughout your entire buyer's journey to close those trust gaps and help you close more deals faster. Today, I'm joined by Natasha Dolginsky, who is the Senior Director of Growth Marketing at Clari. We talk about the importance of simplicity in marketing, how to do more with less, and we even dive into Clari's ABM and LinkedIn strategy a bit. Hey, Natasha, welcome to the show.
Hey, Dustin. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for joining me. So we're going to be talking about a topic kind of dear to my heart just from the businesses I've worked in, and it's around simplicity, doubling down on what works, being cautious of your spend. But one thing that stood out when we were talking before is you said simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. And I really love that sentence and how it boils down. Do you want to maybe explain that, expand on that, and kind of your thoughts in that area for our listeners?
Yeah, absolutely. So not my words, definitely a quote. There's lots of quotes on how simplicity is hard to get, right? And that's why I think a lot of people are not simple in how they approach things because it's so much easier to not be simple. And it takes a lot of work to be simple. And why I love the quote so much is because of that. Is the sophistication is what everybody wants to be sophisticated in how they work and how they approach life and in many areas of life, and yet they don't tend to equate the simplicity with sophistication. And that's why a lot of times you see, whether it's marketing or sales or any other function, is there's so much going on, and then the end result is not sophistication. I think people struggle with that fact, and they don't understand why I want to be sophisticated, I want to be successful, and yet I'm not able to do so because the input is not simple.
Yeah, totally. And I think especially in marketing and sales, there's always new things coming out, be it technologies, strategies, channels. There's a bit of the shiny object syndrome, which in some case, for sure, do that stuff, test it. If it works, double down. But I find it can be easy to think, oh, we're doing good on LinkedIn. Let's do every social channel. And,
Mhm.
thinking that's work and expanding it. So that's definitely a struggle. So for people who are figuring out, okay, I need to simplify things. Maybe I have less headcount. I have less resources. How do you tackle that? Like, what do you how do you decide what to focus on?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So what I do is I like to start with a brainstorm on all the things we can do, because I think if you start with fewer things to choose from, then there is this opportunity cost. And did I think of everything? But if you really put everything on the table and you say, here are 50 things I can possibly do, and you are thinking of bad ideas, you're thinking of crazy ideas and big ideas, and then from that list of 50, making the number up at that big list, then you can start to look at couple of things. One is you can look at effort. How much effort is it going to take me? And if I do this one big effort thing, does that mean I can't do anything else? And
Yeah.
you can also look at impact and say, how impactful is it going to be? So you look at those metrics. And then if you do have data about anything that you've done before, you can look at data and say, have I done this before? Has it performed to the KPI that I wanted to? And then you make decisions there. And then you cut. You start to create your short list, and you then cut the short list. And it's really hard to do. I've done these exercises and they feel very uncomfortable. People don't want to give up ideas, but once you do it once, the next time becomes easier and easier. So starting with a big list and then cutting down from there works really well.
And how do you approach that timeline wise? So is this like a quarterly thing you're doing, yearly, just constant assessment? How does that work?
Yeah, we do it both annually and quarterly. So on the annual basis, it's going to be more of those larger initiatives. And a lot of times with the larger initiatives, it's a little bit easier to cut because we want to always make sure that our marketing initiatives are matching the company initiatives. Because if we're working on a pet project that has nothing to do with company initiatives in a time where you have less budget and less people, probably not a good idea. So definitely annually. And then we do it quarterly, and it kind of depends on what we're cutting. So if we're looking at a channel strategy, to your example earlier, where
Mm-hmm.
if we're doing something on LinkedIn and it's working, are we going to activate 10 more channels like that? Then maybe we are doing that quarterly only. But if it is an idea of how many events do we want to run in a quarter, maybe that even gets done monthly. So it kind of depends on what we're trying to cut and what we're trying to bubble up.
That makes sense. And then you mentioned it's tough to cut some things, especially if, it was your baby, you spent a bunch of time on it, you built this thing up. Do you have some examples there of kind of both ends, I guess? So things thought were going to work maybe didn't, and you had to cut, and then other ones where it hit and you just decided, hey, I'm going to pour a ton of resources into this?
Yeah, so I do have examples, and I do wanna kind of cover why I think it's tough to cut. I do
Yeah.
think it's people have their ideas that they don't wanna give up. I also think that people don't want to disappoint others, and so when I've done these types of exercises with my team where I have them cut things and I say, "You have 10 things on your list, but cut down to 5," the feedback I get is, "I owe this to somebody else," or, "I made a promise that I will help them deliver on this," and so this a desire to help and desire to not disappoint, I think is a big driver why people have a hard time cutting. It's not even the selfish, "Oh, I like my idea." It's, "I want to deliver on the promise that I made." So just a side note on that. But
Hmm.
the things that we've seen that could potentially be cut are some of the more fancy things that we can do. For example, with data, there's a multitude
Yeah.
of attribution models and ROI that you can do and get super, super fancy with. And it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of cross functional conversations and alignment. And yet, the question is, do I really need that fancy measuring method, or can I do well with what I have currently? So that's the thing that it's nice to have, and ideally I'll have it, but definitely down the line. And then other things that do work well and we want to continue to double down is a lot of it account based. So account based, both from a truly one-to-one perspective or one to few, and really working closely with sales to understand their goals and what does that list of accounts or a single account look like. And doing account based has worked really well for Clary at least.
That's awesome. That's perfect segue because I wanted to actually
Yep,
talk
perfect.
about the ABM side because I've experienced this as well. Well, trying to build ABM programs for smaller companies or companies without a lot of headcount, it's really easy to get too kind of niche and granular, want to try all these fancy things off the bat, and then it takes 4 months to build, and you don't know if all that was worth it. So I'd love to hear how you built out the program, from a baby steps approach, like let's get this live and try it, and then things that you doubled down on. Because I think a lot of people, given the current economy, account based makes a lot of sense, right? You want to
Mhm.
get your target accounts and really hit them. So yeah, I'd love to hear what you did there.
Yeah, for sure. And this is definitely part of the huge puzzle piece is to make sure that sales is aligned. And
Yeah.
Clary, when I came into Clary, we already had such a good relationship with sales that that is normally where a lot of people get stuck because sales doesn't agree or sales is not even looped in. So choosing the right accounts and making sure that if marketing, remarketing is running one-to-one programs or spending a lot of dollars on a set of accounts, that those are the same accounts that sales really cares about. Because if they're not, you're going to have a disconnect, and then taking a look at the one-to-one programming and picking the bestest account that you can, both from a ROI perspective. So what is the deal size going to be? And then if you are lucky enough to have a technology that gives you a little more intent, or if you have more information about the strategic initiative that that account cares about, is going for that lower hanging fruit because you know what to tell them. You have a compelling message to deliver to them. So that's the one-to-one. And then the one to few is again being kind of smart with the segment that that cohort of the accounts that you create. So it can be sometimes it's industry, sometimes it is where they are in the maturity of the technology industry that you sell. Sometimes it is another element of a characteristic that these accounts share because then you can have the same message go out to hundreds of accounts and that's a lot more efficient. But once again, you need to be aligned to knowing that these set of accounts actually cares about this message that we're about to deliver.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I like starting with the one to one and picking that this is the perfect account or these are the perfect, 3 accounts and starting there. Cause I find
Mhm.
a lot of people, and I've done this as well, it's account based, but it's one to many to start. And then you start getting a little bit too fancy with some of the personalization, some of the tooling, and you lose
Mhm.
that manual touch where I think you get a lot of insights that way and you get a lot of immediate feedback that you can build on. On the
Mhm.
flip side, though, with the one to many, I'm curious how that's going to play out with AI and everything that's happening there right now. And I know your company is dipping your toes, or more than dipping your toes in it, with the Rev GPT and exploring all
Yeah.
that. What do you think is going to happen on the ABM front there? Like anything super exciting in your mind, bringing AI into ABM?
Oh my gosh, I love that question. I have been just completely obsessed with ChatGPT, so I've been trying to really challenge it and put in all sorts of different prompts. I think one too many account based to me is good marketing. I don't
Hmm.
even think it's account based necessarily. It's just figuring out what are the audience wants to hear, and again dividing it into certain subsets of accounts and delivering the message to them. I think what AI can help with there is the speed at which you can create different variations of messaging,
Yeah.
push it live, and learn from it. Because right now, if I think about the process of coming up with what message works and what can I test, it takes a lot of cycles to create that message to then push it. But if I can get that creation process in seconds, then I can
Hmm.
push it really fast and I can quickly identify what's winning, what's not. And I can go back to ChatGPT and say, hey, this worked, give me more like that, but with another variation. And so the speed at which I can test things become just it's seconds. It's seconds and minutes versus maybe days and weeks.
Yeah, and I found, talking about doing, a little bit more with less and doubling down on things, it's also helped me a lot with just writer's block and figuring out what that initial message is going to be. Maybe I'm not going to have ChatGPT write it, but if it can prompt me with these are 10 titles, it's going to be two or three that are probably better than what I would come up with right away. So
Mhm.
it's super interesting. I just wonder how far it's going to go. You know what I mean? Like what so that's actually a good next question I think. On the one to one side or the one to few side, what are the human points that you feel are going to differentiate as people expand into AI? Like how do we keep that
Mhm.
separation?
Yeah, you said something earlier where you mentioned that you wouldn't have AI write things for you necessarily, and I think that's the biggest difference about people using AI well and not well, is if I have my one-to-one account message, I can put it into ChatGPT what I wrote and say, "Disagree with me," or tell me if I'm
Yeah.
selling into or marketing into a sales leader, tell me what some of their pushbacks might be, and getting that type of input and that type of prompt into AI and ChatGPT has been extremely useful because people tend to like what they write.
Mhm.
I wrote
For
it,
sure.
I like it, and so when you write it or you have ChatGPT write it, but then you once again push and say, "Hey, change it up," or "Give me the opposite opinion," or things like that is what makes it speeds that process up, and then you can take something that is 80% there and add that human touch about the personalization that only a human would know, because I had this conversation with a VP of sales yesterday, and I know that they're da 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 strategic initiative of this, or they use certain words in their company I can really tie in those words and add that human touch, but the speed with which I can brainstorm and I can create and ask for opposing thinking, if that makes sense. And what are the challenges I might get from the real human and get ahead of those questions? That has been super helpful.
Yeah, no, I love that. And figuring out, like you said, what are those very specific things that AI couldn't find? For me, the thing I've been using it for a lot is just saving me time on the research steps.
Yeah.
So, especially with ChatGPT Plus, where you can feed something live, it would take, it's not quick. Even if you're an excellent SDR and you're doing a cold outreach, half an hour research at minimum if you're great. Whereas this can summarize
Mhm.
it quickly and then you can focus on the messaging. So I'm just hoping people use it for good and my inbox really prays that they don't use it for evil and I just get spammed crazy. So we'll see where it goes, but super exciting on that front.
Yeah. And I think what we'll see is there's going to be this influx of people using ChatGPT and the like in a wrong way. And yes, our
Yeah.
inboxes are going to be filled with bad messages. And then what's going to happen is people are going to see it's not working and they're going to stop. But then the people who use it in the right way, for whom it is working, they're going to continue that. So yeah, it's going to go up. But then I think people are going to just give up because they're not using it well and they're not seeing any value in it whatsoever.
Yeah, no, 100%. And then I think just to dive into kind of one last topics here, you mentioned this way early in the conversation, actually, on the analytic side and cutting some things. And attribution is the bane of my existence, kind of in a good way and a bad way at times.
Same.
Yeah, I think for every marketing leader, it's kind of like that. So I'm curious, what are the things you cut there? Like, what do you deem maybe not necessarily necessary or more nice to have?
Yeah. So right now, and this is needed to have. It's more of do we have the tools to pull the data together that's accurate? Because inaccurate data is way worse than no data. Because then, if you think it's accurate, you're making decisions. Da da da. But the things that we currently don't have is ROI by channel, ROI, and getting really granular into ROI by campaign, we just don't have that. So what I do there is I look at a higher level, I look at ROI, but I look at it as a whole. So what's the ROI marketing or what's maybe ROI by different segments? But I don't go as granular as I'd like to because we don't have the tooling or the processes for that. And then the other thing with data too, not on the wide, but attribution lens is I tend to look at different lenses and then present them and say, they're all saying different thing, which
Yeah.
means that there's no one right way to really look at attribution. And we need to look at multiple lenses because I have a user lens. So they're telling me where they heard about Clari. I have the sales lens where the seller will
Hmm.
say, hey, this opportunity came from XYZ. I have the CRM lens where it's automated, and I have the multi-touch. And so between those four lenses, I can look at it and say there's certain patterns that I'm noticing, and there are
Yeah.
certain things that I can then connect the dots very directionally. And we just have to trust that that's the reality, because the true reality is we can't get exact answer for where things come from.
Yeah, I really like that there's a bit of a gut feel intuition based on data, but still a gut feel part. And especially, I was looking at your LinkedIn, like Clary's LinkedIn account earlier, and you guys are doing a really good job on LinkedIn ads, for example. And that is one of the most impossible things to effectively
You.
track the input. And we're doing the same approach. Like we have probably a very
Mhm.
similar strategy there. So how I'm lucky in that case. Our CEO gets it. I assume you're in the same boat as well. But for those who aren't, like, how would you pitch that where it's, I know this is going to work. Let's try it, but it's not going to be a direct one-to-one attribution.
Yeah, good question. I'm actually doing this right now. So I do it in two ways. One, I do draw parallels between things like if I'm only messaging to our account list, the named account list or the target account list on LinkedIn, and we're seeing that most of the things we're getting organically or directly is coming from the same set of accounts, then there must be some correlation. It's not causation, but it's
Yeah.
correlation. So I do that. And then two, I run a test where I pull out a set of random accounts, and I then a quarter or 2 quarters later will look and say these 1,000 accounts, these 500 accounts that were not on LinkedIn for the last 2 quarters are not converting as highly as another set
Oh,
of 1,000 accounts or 500 accounts. And so I don't want to do that continually, but once I do that and I develop a really great relationship with finance where I can say, trust me, there is a correlation between what we do and the output that we provide for the company in pipeline and revenue, then once the trust is developed, I don't have to always run tests such as the initial test
mhm.
I run. I can just continue to say, remember, we talked about the correlation between this and this. It's still there. Therefore, it's still working.
That's awesome. So I do a similar thing with the first one with the named accounts and just tracking
Yeah.
what percentage are accounting. I never thought to do basically the A/B test there, right? Where you split the accounts, some are involved, some are not. I think for people who are trying to push that, that's a really good nugget to try because then
Mhm.
you actually have legitimate data. Um, which, yeah, I struggle. I used to honestly kind of hate LinkedIn ads back in the day because I was looking at them the wrong way and doing the conversion focus. Let's run these and people will buy right away. So I think that's a golden piece of advice for our
Yeah.
listeners. So I'm sure we can talk about all things marketing all day, but I do want to probably cut it off here. And I know you're active on LinkedIn, putting out a bunch of great content on this. So where can our listeners go if they want to learn more about you or Clary?
Yeah. If they want to learn more about me, I'm on LinkedIn. That's the only social media platform I'm on. So you can find me there, Natasha Dolginsky. And then check out Clari.com. We're doing some really amazing stuff for sales is our main audience, and our customers love us. You look at all of our reviews. We're just an amazing tool that helps sellers sell more. And
Awesome.
go to
Yeah, and I'll,
Clari.com.
I'll vouch for that as a customer of one of your products of Wingman. We
Great.
love it and get a lot here. So Natasha, thanks for joining me. For our listeners, I'll include all those links. And yeah, looking forward to getting this one live for everyone.
Thank you so much, Dustin. Great chatting with you. Have a
Yeah,
great
you
day.
too.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. So my main takeaway is really just how difficult but necessary it is to keep things simple. You got to get things out the door quickly, figure out what works and double down on it. And if things aren't working, just stop doing them. I know it can be tough. Inertia can ruin the best laid plans, but I really like the idea Natasha brought up of looking at things quarterly and yearly with a knife, basically figuring out what you can cut and then what you want to work on instead. Thanks for joining me on this episode. As always, we'll be back every Tuesday. See you then.